A big namaste and welcome to the Ex Christian Show, the insider's view of Christianity from the outside. So, who we have today is somebody that you've been asking me for a long time to bring on the show. She doesn't need a particular introduction, specific introduction. You all know her, and she's been doing tremendous work in this field and has contributed to the conversation in a big way. And I'm really happy that she's here to share some of those things that she's been doing and some of the groundbreaking information she has been sharing with viewers across India in multiple languages. She is none other than Mary Suresh Iyer. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Thank you so much for having me. That's been a brilliant introduction. I hope I live up to that introduction of yours. Uh,
You've already been doing that, Mary, and I've been following your work, and I think you've broken all barriers of this field and gone to places where, I mean, we haven't even thought of going. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about the big expose that Mary is doing on one of the biggest evangelical families of India. And I won't waste any more time, and I would straight away go to Mary and ask her, um, you've been doing this expose, Mary, about this church. Um, One of the 400 centers of which your father pastors has been pastoring for a long time now and still pastors it. So I want you to go ahead and spell the name of the church and also what prompted you to do an expose on them. Who are they? And what is it that you are bringing out about them?
all right. So, the name of this church that I've been exposing is Layman's Evangelical Fellowship. It's all in the name. So, the word layman catches uh, it should catch the attention of the viewers. So, this is a church that basically picks up people from the streets and turns them into the so-called evangelists. Okay, this is an 85-year-old evangelical organization. It grew in the shadows pretty much, and most of what you see today is when after the Britishers have when they decided to leave India after the independence, they kind of found that the traditional churches, the churches that they founded, like the Baptist, CSI, we call them denominational churches. These were the churches that were started during the British time, and they had a very organized structure, and they were centrally managed, and they had theological seminaries and things like that. And what they did was, especially in the rural and even in the big cities, whenever they built a church, they just didn't build a church, they built a church compound. The church compound is pretty much a place where all the church members could live for almost for minimal rent, and in some case free rent. They had a hospital, they had a school, everything was provided for. So when if you got a spot to live in this church compound, you pretty much were assured of uh, a certain kind of standard of living. But to the evangelist or the missionary propaganda, this arrangement was not was something that actually was counterproductive, because now everything is provided for. So these people going out to do more outreach work, they didn't have any motivation to do that because they had what they needed. So when this at the tail end of their evangelizing process in the India, that's when the Britishers realized, before they were leaving, that the churches that we have right now are not able to take the cause forward, and without our supervision, it's going to fall apart even more. So they quickly decided that they have to start another round of churches. And what they did was they picked up people from these, they call them dead churches by then. They picked up a few people from these churches, somewhat dynamic, a little bit more educated, and then they use them to go and revive the dead churches, so that now you have a new group of an evangelical church. Now, the problem with this was they took one man and made him a hero. So, this one man who was made a hero, he was so desperate to benchmark himself with this white man. So, his inspiration was that now I'm shoulder to shoulder with this white person. So, suddenly, somebody from a remote village, in this case, in Layman's Evangelical Fellowship, he had a very simple job as a school teacher. And he was picked up, brought to Chennai. In those days, coming to Madras was a big thing. It was almost like, oh, you had this rise in your level. So his family was picked up, brought to Madras, and then under um, the the close watch of the Britishers, he was groomed to take over and build his own evangelical church. And this is not unique to LEF at all. If you look at Baksing group, the Hebron group, he was one such. He was a rich businessman from a Sikh family, and he went to study somewhere in London, and that's where they groomed him, sent him back to start a church. So these were not churches which had an organization. These were all one man shows. And the Daniel family was one such family. Of course, Bhakt Singh was an individual because he didn't have a family. His family kind of denounced him. So he was by himself. So some empires, even like Paul Dinikaran was one such in Tamil Nadu. And here is a very, very, very interesting thing for the viewers to know. All of these people somehow had to be in Tamil Nadu. Now tell me about that. Okay, at a time when the Aryan invasion theory, Dravidian Aryan theory was being propagated, you had this Periyar government that was atheist. The atheists there was against Christianity. They were not against no, atheists are against Hinduism. Whenever we look at Periyar, those kinds of things, they were in hand with Christians. Okay, their objection was to Hinduism. They saw Hinduism as the religion. Everything else was Everything else was really not a big focus for them. So the Madras Christian College, that was the breeding ground for these people, because they were all heavily indoctrinated, the professors, the students, and you had a very conducive government with the Periyar government. I mean, that philosophy of atheism, communism, and no God, and this Dravidian Aryan conflict. So, most of these churches, even the Hebron, was first, all of them took birth in Tamil Nadu and in Madras. So, what is my interest in exposing this church? It started off just as a gesture to get my mother.
So, Mary, before you go there, I really want to note here that the motivation to start a church in India, especially, is not spiritual, or it's not about Jesus's message or its message of salvation or saving India from, going to hell, or save it from idol worship. So, nothing of this sort is the real motivating factor behind starting a church. Would you agree with that? I mean, in the cases that you just said, that Bhakt Singh happened to go to London, and then he saw that when he came back to his people, he could be a leader. That's what they groomed him to be. Similar is the case with the Daniel family. So Dinakaran's family. So these people were attracted to the fact that they could rise to a level with this by getting associated with an evangelical organization, getting groomed under the foreign evangelists. Is
See,
that what is the motivating
yes, yes,
factor?
there is a fascination um, with being with white skin. Now, let us look at it a little bit more in detail, because this fascination, is it only unique to these so-called aspiring evangelists, or was it part of the pan-India thing? Okay, so we have to look at it like, were only people who espoused to Christianity tried to benchmark themselves with the Britishers or rub shoulders with them? That really is not the case. If you really look at Tamil Nadu, you had lot of people from affluent backgrounds. Okay, that those were the ones we call them brown sahibs. Okay, these were the ones, they were chartered accountants, they worked as estate managers. These were all not from the Christian background. But here is the thing, these people went and worked for Britishers, but they kept their Hindu identity.
Mm.
Even though they were hired, they were groomed, they were educated in English, they went to London and came back, but somehow it was not very easy to convert those people into Christianity and use them as ambassadors for Christian work. Okay,
Mm.
but whenever people from lower category of society, okay, the so-called Dalit background or the backward background, only those people were the ones who were willing to shed their roots, pretty much like their Hindu identity, in exchange for being benchmarked with the Britishers. Okay,
Mm.
so I mean, given a choice, Britishers would have loved to have the so-called higher caste people as their ambassadors, but somehow that didn't happen. So here is the thing, for them, whenever they recruited, whenever the people from the higher social backgrounds, okay, the so-called higher caste people converted to Christianity, for them it was not a social upliftment. They didn't see it as a social upliftment. Okay, they just saw it as, we are talented enough to work for these Britishers, that's why they're hiring us. Okay, but whenever Britishers hired or got these people, of course they were not put as estate managers, they were not really put as CPAs, they were not trained like that. Whenever they came in, they actually came in to clean their houses, be nannies, mop their floors, clean their cars, brush their shoes. Really, they were used only for those things. So these are the people that aspired to somehow become equal, somehow get into the good books of the
And
British.
this was their chance.
And this was their chance. Okay, so these were the people that actually grew up to become, I mean, these are the people that actually worked as maids and watchmen and drivers, that eventually grew up to be the so-called church leaders, and I mean, they started building their empires.
We'll talk about this a little bit more when we are discussing about equality, the so-called compassion of Christ and equality in Christ. But yeah, you go ahead and tell us what prompted you to expose LEF.
Okay. Now, here is a thing, Esther. Most of the people that got into LEF, the people who were recruited into LEF, were really not. They had little bit of Hindus, a very small percentage of Hindus, but these were people that already had some kind of Christian background to begin with. So people from, say, CSI, people from Lutheran Church, people from Baptist Church. So their parents were, in 2-3 generations ago, they were all Christians. So they kind of got an elite, because those churches were almost looked like the village churches. They didn't have all this English preaching and that kind of elite outlook. So whenever LEF came into being as a new church, their selling proposition was that they dressed like Westerners, they acted like Westerners, or there won't be a single person who will speak English in the congregation, but then the preacher would preach in English and there will be a Telugu translation. Okay, it's the
Mhm.
funniest thing in the world. But that is,
But the preacher is a Telugu speaking
of course,
individual.
yeah. In some cases, the preacher is a Telugu speaking individual. Sometimes it could be not a Telugu speaking individual too. But that was a tradition. Even to this day, even smallest of their towns, they somehow want to make it appear as though that they have this big elite English crowd that can only understand English. So that's why we will do English and then we will do a translation. Okay, so a lot of it was a whenever this Baptist and these background people came, because now they became outdated churches, too old fashioned. So this LAF and things like this, they infuse this modernity in terms of conducting English services, let's put it that way.
Mm.
Okay. So many families got reintroduced to a different form of Christianity, which was an elite kind of Christianity. Now, here is my father's background. My family did not have any Christian background. It's not that my forefathers were Christians, or we don't have any Christian background. Okay, so my father was the first one who got converted to Christianity through this church. I don't think even in his village when he was growing up, he had any background. So we come from a very rich rural family. Okay. And my grandfather owned up to 30 to 40 acres of land. And both from my mother's side and my father's side, these were rich landlords who owned lands, who owned cattle, who had their own big farms. They had, in those days, having a bullock cart was a big status symbol, and they used to own three, four of those things. So, by no means, okay, we had lowly social backgrounds, but the only disadvantage in some sense that my father had was when he moved to the to Hyderabad, where he was studying. He didn't have that sophistication to become part of an urban crowd. I mean, he would have gotten there eventually. It's like everybody else. It's not like everybody were urban crowd there, but somehow I think he had this little how insecurity that he is not able to perform. Because here is another thing. There are many layers of this. One is most of these people that come from rural backgrounds have their medium of instruction as Telugu. So now suddenly when they come to college, it's a English lecturer. So you have that little disadvantage of not being fluent in English. Okay. So suddenly being whenever a church like this came and said, now here is an English church, they're actually preaching in English. So what you saw as your drawbacks, that you're not able to assimilate yourself with this urban elite crowd, that that was a promise that LEF said, if you come to me, I'll get trained. A lot of people would come to churches in those days. When I was small, I never really understood that. They would say, if you go to the church, you will learn English. Okay. So that was the kind of narrative that was a hook. And of course my father also went through some personal trauma. His roommate committed suicide, and he was alone in this big city all by himself, so he got recruited to this church. And it's a sad thing to even acknowledge these things, but once he became part of this church, it is not just about getting converted to Christianity, but slowly but surely he started to denounce his rural background. Now was seen as a lowly background, even
Mm.
though when you went back home you had plenty. You had, I mean, most of the people that lived in Elia, because I grew up there, did not even have a fraction of what we as a family owned wealth wise. But somehow they developed this inferiority complex in him, that, oh, you come from a village, you dress different, your people look different, and
Therefore, you are low.
you're low. Okay. And he kind of assumed that, and it took me a long time to kind of I see a discrepancy with that, because I would go home to my grandparents' house, and we were like little princesses. Like as we go home, like plenty people are coming and doing this, doing that, and then we come home here, and my father is humbly bending down and acting like praying things like, "Oh God, you lifted us up from lowly backgrounds, and because of you, we are given this honor." I'm like, what the heck? In fact, here is where we don't have honor. When we go back home, we had so much honor. Okay. And but I grew up with this discontentment, lot of questions. Of course it took me some time to formalize my thoughts. And of course I don't think, my mother also comes from a very very traditional and also a well-to-do background. So she also didn't take to this Christian value system as much as my father would have loved to have. And my mother had her own she had she was rooted in Indian tradition of trying to take care of her extended family. So my father has a huge family, so he took care of that. But somehow my father got trapped into wanting to become an evangelist. Remember, I told you, the layman evangelist. So even the layman evangelist for him in his case was, he could do his regular job, and like have his he was an engineer by training. He was educated as an engineer and he worked as an engineer. So the kind of thing that they told him was, you can continue your job as an engineer, but you can also be an evangelist. So they sold that dream to him, right?
A part-time evangelist.
Yeah, eventually to become a full time. Okay, so
Okay.
you go on both boats for some time. At some point this will be kicked off and this becomes your main profession. But it never happened. I mean, for some great reason, I actually
Mm.
thank God that it didn't happen, because that allowed us to get the freedom that we needed to get out of here. So this disillusionment of seeing discrepancies even as a child, somehow, and my mother not being bought into this church philosophies. For her, respecting her husband was important. Okay, so she only did whatever he wanted her to do to the church so that he can keep a respectful position in the church, but she herself was not invested into it. And of course I got married to a Hindu. And then in this church you had to get married only to the church members. This is
LDF members.
LEF members. For them, marrying a non-Christian was was a sin. Okay, it's like, if you married, if anybody from LEF married a Hindu or a Muslim or whatever, okay, that is a bigger sin. But it was equally bigger sin to marry somebody from another church. Okay,
Non-LDF.
so now they're talking about cults and cliques and things like that. Okay, so after my marriage, my father was isolated, because now he was supposed to raise his children to become God's become I mean somebody like him, but he failed miserably. And then of course I have two younger brothers. They also didn't follow suit. Of course they didn't marry Hindus like me, but somehow my father did not have the position that he wanted. Remember, he was eventually was going to be an engineer, and at some point become this big man in the church who would control his own church, have his own pastoral thing. It never happened. It happened briefly for some time, and right after that I got married. So this was a dream that he had, that he wanted to become an evangelist. And he lost so many opportunities because first his wife was not with him, then I got married, so he did not have family. How do they call it? He did not have family testimony, so
Mm.
he could not grow up to it. But after he retired, okay, after, almost after 10 years after his retirement, they kind of uh, hooked him up. Okay, now the children are gone, and all three of us settled abroad. And probably they saw that he was still desperate. It's not, I mean, I could not even say that it is their initiative, but he himself, like, can you give me a center? I always wanted to do it. Can you give me a center? And of course, sure enough, because of his persistence and their desperation, they allowed him to go take over a center. And that triggered a lot of things for us, because my father created a lot of confusion in our lives because of his association with the churches. He would take random transfers and move from place to place without even our consent for the most part. And he was an absentee father. Like, here is a funny part: he was the one who brought us into this Christianity nonsense. I rarely remember this man spending a Christmas day with us. Okay,
Mm.
so even the so-called Christmas Christian celebrations were also not part of our family, eh, while we were growing up. So it was so absurd for me. Like, you know what? First of all, we don't have a larger Christian community where you have family celebrations, because others used to have, and we never had that because we don't have any background. And the only thing that we know about Christianity is because whatever our dad is teaching us, and this person himself is a missing father. So really, even though he brought us into this Christian field, he himself never invested in training us to be Christians, because he was gone half the time to go and build somebody else's churches, save somebody else's souls. But what he missed was that in the process, he didn't have enough time to spend time with us, to groom us into becoming the kind of
Or
Christian.
was he building his own career as an evangelist and trying to impress the masters?
No, I think my father was very invested in the. My father, see, if you really look at these people, most of these people that convert to Christianity, is there, they have a step. Nobody leaves Hindu background and goes to Christianity, especially in the 70s. Their first romance was with communism. Okay. And this idea of equality, this idea that they want to have a utopian society, they were all motivated with Karl Marx, those philosophies. Okay. And a lot of it's not just my father, who some people got converted into Christianity after this journey of going through communism, and some people have become these extreme leftists who keep on in Hindu identity but deny everything about Hinduism. Okay. uh,
Mhm.
so some people completely denounced Christianity and said, you know what, I want, denounced Hinduism and said, you know what, I want to take on a Christian identity. So in fact, I appreciate them better than those who actually um, keep a Hindu thing but work against the dharma that of the name.
Mm.
Okay. But fortunately, a person like my father said, you know what, I'm done with Hinduism. It's not that they had any Hindu background to begin with, but they somehow, for conversion factors, to 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 say that God saved them, somehow they want to say that we came from this Hindu background. But really, I don't think my grandparents, they had some rituals that they followed in the village. So there was no great lineage of Hinduism to begin with. When some of these people say that we converted to Christianity from Hinduism, like, what defined them as being Hindus? There's really no benchmark there. Okay. And to get back to where he was, so whenever he took on this new pastorship, I was very upset that these many years we tried to stay away from this, and you're actually retired now. And this is something that mom was never willing to do, because she never wanted to become a pastor's wife and move to a church and become a pastor's wife at any point, much less at this age. And so it actually started off with fighting to say that my mother is not going to move anywhere to become a pastor of a church at this point. Okay. But that triggered a lot of things, because what happened was, to put my father in that place, another family was kicked out. And whenever
Mhm.
I led to find out, like, what happened to this family, why was this family kicked out, and it opened a big can of worms of a lot of mismanagement of funds. It all centered around this family was used for 40 years to build this church's organization, and their daughter was sent to their headquarters in Madras to go and work in a school. And there, the financial manager who was taking care of this LEF's complete financial operations, it is a 10,000 crore rich organization. Okay.
Corporation.
Corporation. That, here is a good part. The Daniel family was so fascinated with the American dream that 30 years ago they left the shores of India. And even though they left the shores of India for 30 plus years, Joshua Daniel still managed to be a household name in India as the face of this organization. And he
Here,
managed.
here is an interesting thing, Mary. I really want to note this. A lot of evangelists of that period, the 70s, early 80s, whoever started these organizations, somehow they became evangelists because God was calling them to save India. Turns out that none of them stayed in India.
Correct, correct. Yes,
They left the shores as soon as they were able to.
yes, yes. This is a
So if God had called them to serve in a country, how does that person go away? Did God call them away from that country at that point? So
well,
this is a very important question and surprises me every time I come across a new incident like this. Like talk about Ravi Zacharias. I think now Paul Dinakaran
yes,
has gone to settle abroad.
yes.
So I mean there are other evangelical families. I think even the Komnapalis, the Manna Church, Komnapalis.
Mm-hmm.
Small size, big size, doesn't matter the size of the evangelical corporation or the conversion mills. The moment they were able to leave India, they did. They took the opportunity and they did.
Yes, and they raised. Here is the thing that they did, right? They moved the families there. The children were growing up there, but then he himself, I mean, especially in Joshua Daniel's case, I know that because he would come frequently travel, and then here is an important part: the narrative that they created. Okay, this man of God is leaving his family and coming and serving us. I mean, it just beats you. First of all,
Leaving a good lifestyle, good quality of life behind, and coming to live in this poor quality of life
correct. In
in
India.
India
Yeah.
for the sake of the Lord and because He cares for the souls of India.
And you know
That's the
what?
narrative they create.
Yes, sir, that is a very interesting thing. You know what they would do? Just like the Britishers who left the comfort of the foreign land, how they came and struggled for the Lord in this hostile
Country
conditions.
hostile
Okay.
country.
Now Joshua Daniel will say that I am a missionary, my family is there, but here am I pouring my life out for you. That is the biggest nonsense you will see. First of all, you build this organization based on these many people. It is their money you looted and moved to the US to go
In
and
fact, it's the same dirt. If he calls this dirt, it's the same dirt that he came out of, right?
right, right, yes, yes. And then
The dirt that he's referring to, that's the same dirt he came out of.
absolutely, absolutely. And then suddenly they are the missionaries that are now coming and toiling for the Lord with the hardships in India.
So was that the narrative created?
Yes,
Did
yes.
you hear? Did you grow up hearing that
Of
narrative?
course, yes. Look at Joshua Daniel leaving his family behind. He's coming and running for the Lord, and he's serving the Lord with all his heart. I mean, so here that created such a bad example that now he would say, I left my family all the way in the US to come and serve you all. Why can't you leave your families and go and work somewhere else? Every Sunday morning,
Okay,
if you want to go to another town to work, why is your family bothering you? I'm coming, I have left my family 10,000 miles away to come and serve you all here. So you have to rise up to serve the Lord just like I'm doing. And all I'm asking you to go to another town just few hundred kilometers away, and you're complaining.
right.
What are you doing for the Lord? That is the kind of narrative that they created. Okay.
So you started investigating that there was this family who your father replaced, and that family was serving the organization for the past 40 years,
Mhm.
and they were uprooted from their position just to fill your dad in there,
So here is what
to
happened, right?
fill your
A
dad's
person like my
aspiration.
father was a good catch because he was a retiree. He did not need any money from them. The families that have served for a long time, they still financially dependent on this organization. So they were getting old. They were kind of getting useless. So they got so greedy that even the little money that they spent on these people, they didn't want to spend anymore. So a person like my father was a good catch because now he not only doesn't require money. Now he has three children living abroad. If he wants, he will give you some more. So he was a good
True.
catch at that time. Okay. So at the end of all of this, even though my father was hoodwinking us, telling us that I'm doing God's work and why are you all bothering me like this, I looked at the finances of it. I never looked at church and its business and anything. I only looked at it as people controlling, these church leaders controlling others' lives. But this particular incident helped me to dig into the finances of this church. And that's when a lot of questions that I had as a child that were in the back burner, like, you know what, I left this church, why do I worry about it? Then I looked at the with a fresh set of eyes, like, how is my father managing this money? How is he collecting this money from these people? And my mother used to say that, yeah, how will, because every time I said, dad has to get out, we can't do this, this is not for you all. My mom would say, why would they leave dad, ma? They won't, because every month he sends 50,000 rupees. He has a group of 100 people that he has in a church. I'm like, what? 50,000 rupees is a lot of money in India, and he's sending 50,000 rupees every month. And how is he collecting this money? Is he giving receipts? And those kinds of things I started digging.